Well, this morning we are starting a new series on the book of John. And if you're able to, you can turn there. We're going to read from John 20 this morning. That will be our text. Right at the end of chapter 20, verse 30 and 31 will be our two-verse text as we intro our week. But because we are beginning a new series this fall that takes us through the book of John, I wanted to begin by inviting you to take up a scripture reading challenge. And the challenge is for you to read through the entire book of John. I know it's not a crazy challenge, but to read through the entire book of John. You could easily do it, I think, hopefully at least 2 or 3 times even. But I'm asking this morning, I'm starting with an ask, if you'd commit to reading through it at least once. Maybe you want to do that with a friend or with your small group or alongside your spouse or after dinner with your kids. But I want you to, or maybe when you're listening, you can listen to it when you drive to work. But I want you to commit to reading it through. And it doesn't matter how you do it. With Scripture, it's sort of like the fruit of the Spirit, which is against these things there is no law. There's no wrong way or right way to read it. You can read 2 sentences. You can read 4 chapters. It doesn't matter. And if it helps incentivize you, I just want to let you know, I'll put this on the screen. There is a unofficial but completely John-themed prize pack that I've put together for the person that reads through the book of John the most. All right, does anybody, and if you have any other suggestions of John-themed things we could add, I will fictively answer and make these available to you. So, I don't know, maybe today you're just really hoping for that Long John Silver poster, and if that's true, then you know what to do. I actually decided probably get Johnny Depp to award this to someone at the end. So keep track. We'll make it a competition. The thing is, regardless of how you do it, I want to challenge you to make a decision, not tomorrow, but right now. Will anybody make a decision right now that you will read through the book of John by the end of the fall? Anybody willing to do that? Don't say it if you won't, but if you will, then do it. And the reason I want you to do it, the reason I don't normally ask people for commitments like that on a Sunday, is because of the specific promise that lies at the heart of John's gospel. A very great and precious promise that is directly tied to the reason why John wrote his book. And the promise is that we'll see will drive our study this fall. Every week we're going to be looking and thinking about how we can enter into and grab hold of that promise. The riches of which I hope we can all deeply receive. And the reason I'm asking you to commit to reading it is that the only condition for receiving the benefits of the promise that John wants to give us rests on you reading the book. You just have to read it. And the promise itself is spelled out, it's spelled out in many places in the book of John. He's sort of on about it over and over again. It's most plainly stated in our text this morning in chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. And so I wanted to begin by reading that together to help us sort of grasp the meaning and the invitation. So if you wouldn't mind putting that up, Eric, this is the verse. John ends, and this is sort of the unofficial end of John. He says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." All right, now did you hear the promise? There's lots of words there, but did you see the promise? John says at the end that by believing, this is the promise, if you believe, you can have life in his name. Now I know has anybody heard those verses before? It sounds familiar. And so what we're trying to do today is dig out the familiar because there's something more that it's easy to pass over. And John's promise is saying, look, we saw Jesus perform every day. We walked with him and we saw him perform a ton of signs. So many signs, and by that he means miracles, so many acts of power that they can't be contained in a single book. He says, but I curated, I put together these specific signs so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, you might have life in his name. John is saying his singular desire in writing his book in the fashion that he did, if you want to know why John included the stories he did, his entire purpose was that he believed that they contained all that was necessary for a person to, like in his time or 2,000 years later, to begin believing or continue in their belief. His story has a blatant agenda. John is exposing his bias. He's saying, I want you to believe in Jesus. I want you to believe in Jesus. And he's not hiding it, he's declaring it. I think that's helpful for us to know right away as we read through his book. See, he had come to grasp and understand this pivotal and great and pivotal truth about the good news that Jesus declared. And this is the thing that John realized. And the secret I think that we need to pay attention to today is that everything in life rests on believing. Everything depends on faith. Do you understand that? Well, maybe explain this. Everything depends on believing. That everything we will ever need comes to us in this life because of our belief, because of faith. And the question you might be asking is, what are we believing in though? Or what are we believing? Well, here's what I think John is wanting us to understand. Life rests on believing that your life and your breath, your very existence, were not something that you created, not something that can be earned. Your life, your breath is not something that you can build or create yourself, but rather everything that we have and everything that we are comes to us as a gift given by God. Do you believe that this morning? That life, the breath you're breathing right now, is a good gift from God. And that to live, to exist, is to know something about grace. That God is gracious and good. And John is saying, everything I have written is aimed at helping you reorient your life around this idea of believing that truth. That life isn't self-sustaining, that life doesn't rest on all of your many choices and decisions, but life rests on believing first. See, we all have thought that we were living life. Does anybody think you're living life right now? You're experiencing life. Well, John sort of has he kind of challenges. He says, you think you're living life right now? But John is telling us that this life that we're living isn't life as it was made to be. You're living a life that's been hijacked and warped and shifted and broken apart, separated by sin. And he said, that's not really life at all. Imagine a young child who separated from their parents, has to live as an orphan on the street. Picture, Oliver Twist. This existence of meagerly, searching for food and begging and striving and reaching. We would look at that child and say, that is not life as it was meant to be lived, is it? It's not much of a life at all. And John is saying much the same. He's saying our sin, our prideful independence that's at work in all of the world around us, our lack of believing the truth about God has warped our experience of life so that it is like a fleeting shadow of what it was intended to be. Disconnected from the truth about God and the power of his grace. He says the life that we've been living labors under the curse of death. And he said, but that's why I wrote what I wrote about Jesus. Because we were living that same life that you're living right now. And then someone interrupted that life and said, come and follow me. Someone met me and began to help me realize, to see and to hear, and then even to imagine for those 3 years, the existence of an entirely new kind of life that was happening right in the midst of the old life. He said that's what we experienced when Jesus was with us. It was like life as it was meant to be. The thrill, John is there going, you don't understand the thrill of the freedom of walking with Jesus. You don't understand what happens when you're with him and the power of the hope that is eternal, seeing at work around you. You don't understand the shelter and the safety of experiencing God's grace and his care. You don't know what it was like when he looked in our eyes and he pulled us forward, when he challenged us, when he ate with us. He said, we tasted life, and it was so good. It was incredible. Life fueled by joyful believing. Life resting on God's goodness and provision. Life burgeoning with possibility and strength. And John says, when you begin to believe that life is actually how life was meant to be, it's like being born again all over. He said it's like becoming a new person from the inside. He says living a new life that never ends right within the context of the old one as it's fading away. He said it's like being adopted into a new family after having been orphaned and alone. Can you feel what John's trying to say to us? He says, that's why I wrote about Jesus the way that I did. That's why I picked the stories I picked, because he was the one that showed us what it looked like when you lived your life completely believing in God, completely trusting in God. When you live by faith, he showed us the truth of what life really is and was meant to be from the beginning. And John's almost, he's whispering at this point. He says, and it turns out life doesn't end in death, but lives forever. True life can't be quenched. He says his life was eternal. It was unstoppable. And it turns out, he said, truly living, and this is what he's just shocked about, I think. I think he's just sort of blown away by this fact. He says, and that true kind of life that Jesus lived doesn't require, because you're looking at going, how do I get it? How much do I have to pay and what do I have to do? And John says, and this is the best part, it doesn't require any of our striving, any of your good works. It doesn't require you to fight for it. It actually takes away relieves you of all of your self-protection and is instead built on just receiving. It lives to reconcile things. It delights in giving and in sacrificing. And it's the most beautiful way to live. He said, I, John, have found that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. His way is the way. His life is the life. His truth is the truth. He says, and who really wants to keep living the way we've been living anyway? The life you've been living isn't real at all. Compare it. Read through these stories and see. It's poisoned by the threat of death. It's trapped under the weight of anxiousness and fear. It's always utterly self-dependent and detached from any true source of meaning or hope. And he said, and mine was too, until I met Jesus and he showed me the truth and invited me to follow him. And all that was required for me and now for you and us to be able to receive that life, to walk with him, is that you believe. Anybody wanting to believe this morning? You realize everything rests on believing? If you want something in this world, if you want to know what life is, this is where it starts. So I want us to take that promise seriously, very seriously, soberly. No matter how long we may have been believing, maybe you've been believing for years, no matter how many times you've read the Gospel of John and enjoyed it or didn't understand it, I want us to realize that invitation is still good. There's still more to be found here. The door is still open. The opportunity is still rich. Jesus has abundantly more life to give us than we could ever or have yet to or even begun to imagine. Now, for some of you, if you look back at our text here, you notice we glossed over some of the key parts of the verse. That will be important and will really guide our study. And this is, after all, a series about the signs of John. If you hadn't heard that, we're going to be studying through the 7 signs of John. And you're right, because John does seem to imply, does not simply intend to tell us stories about Jesus. He doesn't want to just tell about the miracles, but instead in his word, he wants to show us that these miracles are signs. See, while all the other gospel writers speak about Jesus' healing acts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they call Jesus acts of healing and power. They say, these are miracles that Jesus performed that show us his life and his power. But when John talks about those poignant moments, he says, yeah, it's great. It's incredible what Jesus did, but these things are signs. There's more to see than just turning water into wine. And everybody has been longing for that trick to be, to receive that, right? Your tap water, right? Jesus' miracles are more than just him. There's more going on than just him walking on water. John wants us to know these stories, every single one that we will read this fall, are clues to who Jesus is, to seeing him as he is, so that we might believe in him, and if we believe in him, we might receive his life. That's what he wants. He wants you to have the life, to live it. N.T. Wright, who's a scholar and author, he said John's specific decision to call them, he doesn't use the word miracles at all. He simply says every time he uses the word signs instead of miracles, his intent is to turn the reading of John into kind of a divine treasure hunt, to kind of lead you through with some mystery of what do these things mean. Knowing that as you come across each one, they're a clue to lead you one step closer to the truth, one step deeper into believing, 1 foot further into faith. And it reminds me of a time it was probably about 12 years ago. We were still living in Guelph, and at that point, a few of us had been gathering to pray because we wanted to go out and do some evangelism in our city. And instead of simply trying to Our strategy was, instead of simply trying to cold call people or just strike up a conversation, which, that can work, we instead decided our approach would be to pray first and listen for God to give us a sense of direction about where we should go, what we might look for when we got there, or even insight about who we might be praying for, what their needs might be, physical, emotional, spiritual, relational. And so we would just try and do that, and it's an act of faith. It takes a little bit of courage to do that, but we're practicing, saying, hey, we want God to lead us and show us where he's at work. We believe he's at work. And so one specific time after we had prayed and spent time listening, we then shared with one another anything that we felt God speaking. And one person had a sense that we were supposed to go to the mall. Okay, so we'll go to the mall. And another person had a sense of that there was someone that was struggling with the anxiety around finances. Okay, so that was a need. They felt like maybe we'll find someone that has that need. And of course, being ultra spiritual myself, I had absolutely nothing. And so I just said, I got nothing to contribute. I'm not going to force it. And then it was great because at that very moment, Rach says, yeah, it's funny that you say that because I had something, but it doesn't really make any sense. And so she said, the only 2 words, and bless Rachel, she said, the only 2 words I had were wonderful and underwear. And I thought, this is completely unhelpful. And I thought, yeah, that's fitting that you say that because she had to stay home with Lucas. So she wasn't going to go out with us. I'm like, okay, leave us with wonderful and underwear. They're very unhelpful. And so we're laughing about it and said, okay, great. So we have a good laugh. We head out to the mall. And as soon as we pull in, we kind of realize, like, this is a massive place. We have zero idea of where to go. And I'm sure there are lots of, it's in the university town. There should be lots of people with financial needs. We would probably throw a stone and hit one. But we realized, okay, we're just going to go for it. And undeterred, so we park. We go in the nearest store. It was Sears, is a way back, playback. We walked into Sears. I know Peg used to work there, right? And 8 p.m., I think it might have been a Friday night. And I go down one aisle. Kate goes down the other. And not 2 seconds later, I hear kind of I don't want to call it a squeal. That's sort of demeaning. But I heard someone kind of, right, shout. And I look over, and Kate's doing this, giving me the sign. So I walk over, and she's standing beside, and she's pointing up. She's got her arm extended. She's in the women's department. And there on the wall is this massive sign that says Wonder Bra. And we're thinking, there it is. It's wonderful underwear, right? I'm not a PhD, but I could put that one together. All right, and it just so happens there's two girls there, and I said, listen, I'm not going in there. It's a no-fly zone. I'm not going to interrupt people shopping for underwear. So I told Kate, you go ahead and call me in when it's okay. So she went in, and there's two girls there. And she starts talking to them, and when it's safe, I kind of peek my head and join in. And when they know it's going to be weird, but it's not weird. And so we just said to them, listen, we were praying and felt like, God directed us, and we just wanted to pray for anything that you might have need. We had a sense maybe one of you had a financial need. And the girl points to the other girl. She definitely has a financial need. She's just like in deep. And you could see the girl, she's like, yeah, like I've got a lot, like I got a lot of debts. I'm anxious about it. And we just said, listen, God must want your attention. Like I have no idea what you think about God or if you know God, but you must be on his heart and he must care about what you're worried about. And I just want you to know that. And if you're willing, we'd love to just pray for you and just let you know that, just agree with you that maybe God would meet and provide for you and that you'd know his care. And so she said, yeah, I've really never had anybody deny that. Like she just said, yeah, I'd love for you to pray for me. And so we prayed for her and we blessed her. And, I said, silver and gold I have not, but what I do have I give to you. And it was just such a faith-building moment. And we couldn't wait to get home and tell Rach about this wonderful underwear. And I say that because the book of John is like that. It's full of these clues and these signs that don't always make sense, that were given to us, that we're meant to follow the path and to ponder with, even if at first we don't fully understand what it is that Jesus is actually saying, what he means or what he's doing. And signs, if we begin to follow, we'll discover they lead us into this moment. And this is what John intends, where a woman's underwear department can become the meeting place of heaven and earth. God meeting someone, speaking to someone, God meeting us. A place where someone who didn't know and who didn't see and didn't perceive God was suddenly made aware of his graciousness and his goodness. And this is what we find when we read through John, is God is pursuing us, just like John. And the signs are exciting in and of themselves, but in the end, our story wasn't about wonderful underwear. It wasn't even about someone being healed. It was ultimately about pointing someone to discover who Jesus was and is. It was about two girls getting a glimpse of a different kind of life that exists in Jesus. It's about experiencing the longing of God for you. Now, this morning, whether you understand it or not, the Lord longs for you, to know you. Now, maybe you're questioning this morning, and if you can put the verse back up there, Eric, I don't mind. Maybe you're asking, how do we know which of the stories that we're going to read are actually signs? And it's a good question. And what we'll find as we go through the book is that John starts off outright by telling us at the end of the story, chapter 2, he turns water into wine, and then he says, this is the first sign. And then a few chapters later, he heals someone, and he says, and this was the second sign that Jesus did to reveal his glory. And that's as many clues as he gives us, but we know that there's more signs to happen. He's given us enough to understand that there's more going on to point us forward. We've got enough of the plot to discover the clues. And what we find is, if you attempt to count them forward, the different acts that Jesus did, the miracles that he performed, you'll find that like most things in John, there are 7 of them. 7 specific signs. The first is, and I'll just go over them just so you know where we're going, water into wine, the healing of the officer's son, the lame man that's healed, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on water, the healing of a man born blind, and then the raising of Lazarus in chapter 11. And it's not really surprising when you study John to find out that there are 7 signs, because it's one of the many groups of 7 in John. So for instance, not only are there 7 signs in John, but get this, there are also 7 I am statements. Does anybody remember that from a few years ago? We went through John, 7 I am statements, 7 separate sections of teaching that Jesus does, 7 witnesses that testify to Jesus, 7 ministries of the Holy Spirit, 7 individual encounters Jesus has with people, 7 women who are mentioned, and 7 questions that Jesus asked Pilate, or that Pilate asked Jesus. And so what we're going to do in our quest into deeper believing, so that by believing we might have life in his name, we're going to look at one sign every week. And realize that these are not just clues or just miracles, but signs and clues about Jesus' identity. As you'll see in our verse today, there are 2 distinct identities, so that you may believe it says that Jesus is the Christ or the Messiah. This is what he's after, and that you'd believe he's the Son of God. So it's not just I believe in something, or I believe in just general God, but he's pretty specific. He says Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. These 2 identities. And those terms will just 2 seconds, fly by, shooting. We'll just get into them. The term Son of God, while used as a term in the Bible to refer to the King of Israel, David himself was called the Son of God. The chosen representative. Here, when John is speaking about it in the New Testament, it has more going for it than just saying he was the Son of God as in royalty. Because it refers to someone who shares the son of, someone who shares the identity of, more than just a mere likeness to God, but someone who shares his metaphysical being. Someone who is not just a man, John is saying, but is divine. That's what the term Son of God means for John. And that is something John wants to see right from the beginning. If you read John chapter 1 this week, you'll find that he wants us to know that Jesus is the incarnate Son of God, the Word made flesh who dwelt among us, right? And then not just that, he says, I don't want you just to, and we're going to find out why that matters, that Jesus is the Son of God, but he also wants us to believe that Jesus is the Christ or the Messiah. And what it means to believe in Jesus as the Messiah this morning is that he is the point, as one scholar said, he's the point of the whole story. If you've read through the Old Testament, it becomes quite clear that Israel will not be able to fulfill its calling by itself. Right? What do they do? They go up and they go down. They go up and they go down. They have a good king, they have a bad king. And then finally they end up in Babylon and captive by Assyria and destroyed. And in that time, if you read through the Old Testament, read through the prophets, it becomes quite clear that they are speaking about the hope of God's promises to them, saying, someone is going to come and save us and deliver us. There's going to be and the word they use is an anointed one, a Messiah. And as unsure as we realized that they were about what that would actually look like, they had, and again, this treasure map of prophecies about his purpose and his message and his identity. And John is trying to tell us, listen, if you wondered about who it was, I'm going to explain that Jesus is not just someone, but he's the Messiah. He's the one you've been waiting for. That all of his stories are signs and clues about how Jesus is the Messiah of Israel. That Jesus is the one the whole story has been about. And if that's true, that Jesus is the one that the story of the whole world is about. And to bring that home, it means that Jesus is at the center of the meaning of your life and your story. In small town Elora, right? In retirement or at the start of your life, that Jesus is somehow the meaning and the purpose and the joy of what your life is and who you are. Or John wants us to know in his words that through him everything was made, and without him not anything was made that was made. That in him was life, and that life was the light of men. And that light shines in the darkness, and that darkness has not overcome it. That by believing in Jesus as the Messiah, and I know that sounds a little bit clinical, right? I believe Jesus is the Son of God. I believe that Jesus is the Messiah. It's like, no, these things matter and mean things for our lives. And in accepting that truth, it means that our lives and our stories are weaved into his. Brought back to the realm of the story of God's story of redemption. And it's a treasure hunt that we're being invited into to discover. Now, I don't know what you hear when you hear that, when you read and think about John's promise, when you consider the conviction of his words and the confidence with which he speaks. But this is what I hear. I hear the voice of God. Don't you? Like Jesus could say, I did many other things in the book, but I helped John remember and think about these specific ones because I came so that you might believe who I really am and that you might have life. You. And this jumps off the page. John is speaking to us. See, I hear the voice of God. I hear the longing of God himself calling us to believe that there's more to this life than what we know. That there's more to life and that there's a life that we are made to have through him. And then most importantly, that there's something lost that we were made to recover. We're made to find it. It's a universal longing that when awakened is not easily pacified. Do you feel the longing in your own heart that you might know God in a deeper way and that you might have his life? The whole thing reminds me of the story of a little boy named, well now a man, but a little boy named Saru Brierley. Has anybody heard of him? Saru, here, I don't know if you can put his picture up there. This is little Saru. Now, the only reason you might know him is because there's been a movie made about his life, but what is unique about Saru was that in 1987, he grew up in India, and he is playing at the train station as he often did with his little brother, and ended up boarding a train, kind of just hopped on, and then couldn't get off. And he ends up on this, born in the small village of Ganesh Talai, he ends up on the wrong train, and unable to get off, he ends up 1,500 kilometers away in the city of Calcutta. This is a 3-year-old child, just a little boy. Now, he doesn't know anyone. He doesn't really even talk very well yet. He's surviving on scraps for a few weeks by himself. Dragged, he was caught or apprehended or someone noticed him, brought him to the police station, and he was unable to describe his own village to them. He barely knew the name of his mother. He even mispronounced his own name so that they didn't actually have the right name when they put out a bulletin to say there's a little boy that's been lost. He was put into foster care, and within the year he was adopted by a couple who lived in Australia. It's a heartbreaking story of separation. Each night as he grew up, he recounts about how he would lay in bed realizing that his real mom was somewhere out there. That he knew there was someone out there looking for him, someone waiting for him. And like us this morning, he felt the call. He felt the pull. He heard the voice, that sound that there was something more to his life. And it set in motion what can only be described as one of, I think, the most unlikely quests of a human quest. Armed with, and by the time he grew up, there was such a thing as Google Earth. And armed with only the fading memories of a 3-year-old boy, little Saru, well, adult Saru in his early 20s, he spent 9,800 hours on Google Earth trying to follow the few clues that he had from his past. He knew that he had ended up in Calcutta, and so he spent and marked out every train line, and you can imagine how many train lines come out of Calcutta. And he followed every single one of them, and it took him 3 years. He only had a few memories of some scant landmarks, a fountain that he played in, a few familiar sounds of the starts of the words. He knew somehow maybe his village started with a B sound of a language he had forgotten, and he searched and searched, and finally one night in 2012, he saw, as he traced the line, he saw the outline of a water tower, something big enough that you can see. A familiar line of a valley that ran from that place, a fountain in the middle of a square of the station by the train. And he knew he had found what he'd been looking for, the small village of Kandwa. And to wrap it, it leads to this one glorious moment of reunion where he's there in his village asking around amongst all the people, and is finally led to his mother and to his sister and to his brother whom he's never met. And there, I can just picture, I've been thinking about it this week, this thought of pacing through the crowd, right? To have it open up and there to see the one who you've been longing for, the one who's been searching for you, and the response and the embrace. And that reunion is really at the heart of the Gospel of John, because he wants us to, by believing, by clinging and searching and grabbing hold of, we might find the one who came to give us life. That by believing, we might have that life again that we had been separated from. And so I want us to stand this morning. And I want us to know that as we're reading these scriptures, there is more going on than just words. There is a call from the heart of God. There's a call for us to come and find. And I don't know did you show the picture of his mother? I missed it. And so I want us to pray this morning. And I want us to ask God to awaken us to that call. There's someone longing for us. And there's a search to find him that we're being invited into.